Good morning. This is Justin back with an engineer's perspective, and today I've got the Leatherman Arc on display here, and that's because I wanted to have a particular discussion around its MagnaCut blade. So, Leatherman Arc, if you do not know, is Leatherman's latest model. It's effectively an upgrade from their free P series, more like the P4. I've got the P2 here. And I do have initial impressions video if you'd like to go watch that, as well as a first sharpening on this blade. And basically what they've done here is they've taken this platform, which is a good platform, and put all of the tools that everybody wanted in it. And it's a substantially fantastic multi-tool. That out of the way, we're here to specifically talk about this blade, hopefully just have a quick discussion on it. So we'll talk about the performance of the MagnaCut at the end. Let's just look at action right off the hop, because with this pocket clip like this, it's a thick, heavy multi-tool, so it's not going to be anything like carrying a dedicated blade in terms of compactness and ergonomics, but there is a lot of opportunity here to replace a pocket knife with this multi-tool, especially if you're already carrying a multi-tool and you've always been carrying a dedicated folder along with it. Having this upgraded steel, it gives you a real option to do an all-in-one solution, especially with this action that I said we're going to talk about. So we've got a thumb stud, and as you can see, no big deal, just whips it right out of there. Not an issue. You can back it off and put it the other direction if you wanted to move your blade into one of these slots for a lefty. You'd have to obviously modify your Leatherman, but that is an option on that thumb stud. So great opening action, lockup, rock solid front to back, side to side. There's a little bit of play, but not a lot. Less than what I felt on other Leathermans. And so just a point of comparison, you've got a charge here, also very flickable. Look at this front to back rock. You can hear it side to side. Not terrible, but still worse than this. So it's one of the free series has some of the best lockups of the Leathermans that I've run into for their blades. So that's good. Good on the lockup. Good opening action. Now the closing action. So if you get your lock pulled all the way over, bam, you can do that with it, which is really nice. So you can whip it open, and I stumble a lot like that, but I mean, it still makes it so much easier to one-hand close than that jobber, but that works too. Yeah, so great opening action, good shutting action if you get that lock all the way over. So action, very good. Best multi-tool blade action that there probably ever was. So it's really good. If that's big for you. So action out of the way, let's take a very key stop at the geometry department. So that is going to be where all multi-tools, or almost all, are going to really stumble, is going to be in the cutting geometry of the blade, because that's what a blade is. The difference between this piece of metal and this piece of metal is the geometry of it. So it's pretty important. That's what makes a blade a blade. So stock thickness, they supposedly increased it over the P series. Come on. 0. Stock thickness, we are at 10.3, or sorry, 1/10 of an inch. Right at the back, we're actually down some. So we got 0.0975. Give that to you in fractional. 3/30 seconds. And then in millimeters, 2.5 millimeters. So, excuse me. Not ultra thick on the blade stock, but you have to keep in mind with this Leatherman blade is that it's very short. You don't have a lot of time for a grind to go from the stock thickness down to an edge. Point of comparison is a Spyderco Delica here. You can see that it has a lot more time to kind of slowly taper down versus that Leatherman. I mean, they even hold that full thickness until right here. Sorry. Until right here. It's a very short distance, creating a pretty significant wedge. Like on this Delica, stock thickness is also 2.5 millimeters. So same thickness, but double the grind height. And it makes a really big difference in terms of cutting ability. And so where you're mostly going to see this issue is, let's say you're going to use this to like cut up an apple for your kid at the zoo. You know, it's going to be kind of hard. It's going to be binding up in there to shove it through, but you definitely can absolutely have. And then you also kind of crack the apple instead of slicing through it, which will just cause it to brown faster and may not be as appetizing, but if you eat it right then and there, not a huge deal. Nobody's going to notice. So that's definitely holding it back, is that grind height. Obviously, with a handle being what they're working with for the height, that's just what it is. I mean, kudos to them for having it bump out like that, like they do on the Free series. I guess it bumps out on the Charge as well. And just to get a measurement of the Charge, I'm just going to stay in millimeters here. 2.35 millimeters. So you can see they did go 0.15, 0.2, 0.1, 0.15-ish, 0.1 millimeters thicker on the Charge Arc rather. Another one I want to look at is the Skeletool CX, and that's 2.5 millimeters, so also about the same thickness as the Arc. So it's kind of in the ballpark of everything here, to be honest. I'm kind of surprised by that. But once again, it suffers from the problem that they all do with the Apple example. Onto the edge, which is probably what everyone is here for. So I measured it earlier. The thickness behind the edge, right back behind the shiny part there, is about 31 thousandths at 17 degrees per side. It came from the factory at about 19 per side. I put a KME edge on this from 140 grit up to 1500 grit, 4 micron, 1 micron diamond on kangaroo leather, down to 17 degrees per side. It was a significant task to grind away the extra metal to thin this baby out from the factory angle down to 17, but we got it. And yes, we're sitting at 31 thousandths at 17 degrees per side right now. That's very much so on the thicker end of behind the edge thickness, which is a very important measurement. And just as a point of comparison, once again, Delica, you can see how skinny that edge is. It's at 15 degrees per side. And you can see how thick the Leatherman is at 17. That's just because this is just a thicker, less good cutting blade. I believe this is around 15 degrees per side, maybe like 17 thousandths, 15 thousandths behind the edge. A lot better of a cutter. Meaning in things that you're not going to wedge into, but you're going to have problems with, would be, let's just say your garbage is full of crap and you want to cut up your milk jug just to save some space. You're going to have to exert quite a lot of force with your arc to cut that thing up, to the point of, if you're not paying attention, you could put yourself in serious danger of cutting yourself because you're having to use so much force. Those are the kind of situations that you're going to get into with a blade with this thick of geometry. All of these blades are going to suffer from the same issue. The only one that does not is actually this Spirit here. I'm not going to measure it, but you can see how thin that bevel is. Also at about 17, 18 degrees per side. So if you want the best behind the edge thickness of any multi-tool, Victorinox is going to be your jam. The only one I have is a Spirit X, so that's one I can confirm, but they're much thinner behind the edge than the competition, and you can tell using it. And so that's a place I wish Leatherman would do better. I wish they would grind them a little bit thinner. You've got a perfect example of one right here. You would make this angle from your grind even thicker if they did that. And so now you get an even worse wedge, which makes the apple worse, potentially. Situation worse. So it's tough when you got a blade this short. Blade shape, you've got this sheep foot style blade. This is one of my favorite styles of blade. You can actually see the Delica is kind of close-ish. It's just that you hold flat quite a bit longer on this blade, and then you just get a curve at the end. It's a perfect blade shape for me. I love the downturned tip. Just to open up package or just whatever you're doing, it's there to meet the surface instead of pointing way up. Versus the Charge series, you can see they hold flat and then they just have a ton of belly in this last little 1/4 inch here, whereas it's a little bit of a smoother swoop on this blade, and I much prefer this style over the Charge Wave style blade for using it. Okay, so we talked about kind of all the specifications. The last thing to discuss now is that MagnaCut in there. How has MagnaCut been doing? So I've had the Arc for at least a month at this point. I think a little bit longer. I'd say I've carried it as my sole dedicated pocket knife in my right pocket pretty much 90% of that time. I did the first sharpening on it by hand. That's on YouTube. And then I think about 2 weeks later, I did the KME sharpening on this, not on YouTube. And I have been stropping the crap out of it ever since. So I've got about, I would guess, 3 weeks on this edge right now. And I've been stropping it every couple days. And it is fantastic. Honestly, like, I mean, it's starting to slow down for sure, but it's still grabbing into my nail just barely acceptably. But like, nail grabbing is one thing in terms of a test of sharpness. But the point I want to make with MagnaCut, as somebody who's not ultra heavy into knife usage anymore, but it's definitely above average from your average office goer, MagnaCut is holding up amazingly. It falls way short of something like K390, like in this Delica, but it is blowing out of the water your S30V in your Charge, your 154 CM in your CX, your 420 HC in your standard Leathermans, and then Victorinox's whatever steel, X50. So it lands solidly right here, but it's reminiscent of S30V, but it really is performing in a different class than everything else below it, this MagnaCut. And I'm super pleased with what Leatherman did on here. I was not expecting a good performing heat treat on this MagnaCut. And speaking of that, I've seen 2 of these that have been poked with a Rockwell tester. 60.5 has where both of those have been. Could be higher, always can be higher, but that's a really, really solid heat treat for a leather or a multi-tool blade. And at the end of the day, when I ask it to do a cut, it does it. When I've got a giant bag of leaves that I need to dump at the dump site, you can't put the bag in there. You got to open it up. And so I cut it open and toss them in there. And it doesn't I'm not just ripping the plastic. I'm actually cutting through it. When I've got zip ties to cut, it digs into them and cuts the zip ties. When I've got plastic packaging to buy new diamond grinder blades, it cuts through that. What else? It does what I ask it to do every time. And that's what knife performance is to me. Like, I've talked about knife performance in other words before, but the point of a blade is you say, these are the tasks I do on a regular basis. I need it to do those tasks to my satisfaction when I ask it to. And it just does that. The vanadium the hardness that they've heat treated this to, the vanadium carbides that are in MagnaCut strop back fantastically. They're definitely keeping that apex from wearing back too far and allowing you to just strop it back over and over and over again. I keep hitting this on 4 micron CBN and it just keeps coming back to like hair shaving sharp. I'm so impressed with how this MagnaCut's holding up. And so they did a really nice job on this. I was prepared to just be lukewarm to it, but they did a really good job here. So overall, what are my feelings on this as being your dedicated knife? This is it. I brought out all my 3 favorite clip-enabled pocket multi-tools here to compare it to. None of these have just been able to replace a pocket knife in my pocket. This one did. This one has. If you like putting a pocket clip on your charge and you run it that way, I don't like that setup on this guy, but I've never been able to keep this in my pocket, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Even though I love this on the belt, love this in the sheath, I cannot keep it in my pocket. And the S30V is great, but it's just not enough. The Arc is enough. And then you just add into there the tool set that they've put into this thing and your one-handed free architecture. This thing is, I love it, honestly. Like, I know it just sounds like I'm just raving here and just gushing, but I have thoroughly enjoyed this last month as this being in my pocket as a multi-tool and as a blade. It's not going to be as good as your Spyderco Delica, but it hasn't disappointed me yet, and that's what I'll say. As a knife snob, as a steel snob, this has not disappointed me yet. And so with that, if you are looking to replace your pocket knife with a multi-tool blade, they finally did that. We finally have a very satisfactory answer to that, I believe, in the Leatherman Arc and their MagnaCut blade. That's all I've got for today. Have a good one. Bye.